Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily, featuring a conversation with composer Lennie Moore. Now, Lennie, you might know as a video game composer. In particular, his very first score was for Outcast. Now, Outcast 2 is supposed to come out this year, so we do briefly talk about it, but that's not the main purpose of our conversation. We are here to talk about Lennie's personal project, his big band album called Mentors. And you're pretty much going to go to school in this episode, and I will explain why. You're going to learn about some absolute legends in producing and recording and performance. First of all, Arif Mardin, legendary record producer, responsible for crafting the sounds of like Aretha Franklin, Chaka Khan, Queen, Norah Jones, phenomenal record producer, absolutely legendary. You're going to learn about another legend, drummer Peter Erskine, who plays on this album and, of course, sounds absolutely amazing. He was an integral part of two of the most famous jazz fusion groups from the 70s and 80s, Weather Report and Steps Ahead. You're going to learn about legendary jazz pianist Toshiko Akiyoshi. I love her recordings. One of my favorites is a live one she did in the 50s called Top of the Gate. Check that out. But Lennie took composition lessons from her, so you're going to learn a little bit about her. You're going to learn about the process of recording a big band during the pandemic, and many other things. And like I said, we do briefly discuss Outcast 2. Not a lot of music examples in this YouTube episode. In fact, none at all. We don't put music in our YouTube episodes for copyright reasons. You got to listen to the audio podcast for that. But Lennie does show some of the score, which is really fun. And so you'll see a portion of his score for one of the tracks, which is pretty great. But at the heart of this entire conversation is mentorship. Mentors, that's the name of the album. And it's Lennie paying tribute through writing music for the musicians that shaped his own musicality and musicianship. I mean, it's really powerful stuff and beautiful to hear Lennie talk about all of these people who were so important in his own life and creativity. All right. Discord, you can find us there. The link is in the show notes and also down below here, this video. And what else do I need to tell you? Join us on Patreon if you can. Support us financially. We'd be grateful. And do give us a subscription to this YouTube video. All right, here's Lennie Moore talking about his big band album called Mentors.
I think for this project, it was a personal project. I had been wanting to do a big band album forever. And since I'm old, forever is a long time. And oh Jesus! So about 3 or 4 years ago, I had this idea. It's just like I was just thinking about everybody who was a mentor for me in my artistic path, and specific people along the way, all the way back to probably high school, and just how cool it was that some of them just took a little time to say the right thing.
Yeah.
And it's also amazing, or actually it was before? No, it was high school. I was thinking back to one of the very first people that I was probably 16 or 17. And, one of the things that's kind of special about that is that, the idea of a mentor for an artist is, the traditional one is that master-apprentice relationship. You study with a particular trumpet professor, and or in the case of my my media composing world, studying with Bill Kettering for conducting, and Bill was a student of Leon Barzan and Arturo Toscanini. So I started with him when he was 80, and I studied with him until he passed away when he was about 87. And this was when I was living in Los Angeles, and that mentorship was amazing. And the Toscanini stories are pretty fun too. And and his passion, man, at 80 years old, he was still practicing piano because he was like, my chops aren't what they used to be.
Jeez, wow. Yeah,
and he had macular degeneration, so he was blind, and I don't care if this is bad karma, but lessons every Monday he would kick my butt, and I would always smile about it. And in the first lesson, he I'll get to the part I'll divulge later, the drop, the mic drop, so to speak, with the conducting teacher. But the first lesson, he said, "Just show me how you normally conduct," and we just put on, like a Beethoven symphony, and I was conducting, and he goes, "You and I have to have an agreement. You have to agree that you're the student." And that I'm the teacher. And the reason for that is because what you're just showing me is that you're conducting the way you think conducting looks like, and I'm going to show you what conducting is.
Wow.
And I was like grinning ear to ear going, I'm in, and it was just like the perfect thing to say, and even in my adjunct professorship stuff that I do at the San Francisco Conservatory, sometimes I have to have that little conversation with some students because they're not really interested in being a student sometimes, and it's they're all wonderful and all that, but they're like,
for sure.
When you're in your early 20s, you think you know everything, and I was that way, and and it's just like it's just an illusion, and. So the mic drop part of this Bill story is he had a little dog named Munchie, and Munchie. Bill was Munchie was so cute. He was a little fluffy little dog, and I couldn't tell what breed it was because Munchie was in a bad state, and and Bill was blind, and his sense of smell was gone, and all that kind of. And Munchie in the middle of the lesson would just drop something right in the middle of the room.
Oh no.
And he'd see me like kind of wrinkle my nose a little bit. And he's like, what's wrong? And he had a really gravelly voice. And I was Munchie just left a present in the middle of the room. And he's like, oh. And then he'd reach down and grab a newspaper and just toss it over the top of it. And he'd go, okay, let's continue.
He didn't have time for that. Could not be bothered.
I'll fix it later.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man. Yeah. So but a lot of fond memories. So this, getting back to this idea of mentorship, it's just like, like this idea for the album came with this concept of just having every tune on the album represent somebody who was a mentor for me, and just in the writing, thinking about who those people were, and sometimes it's a quality of who they were as an artist, and sometimes it was just something that they said to me, and we can get into some of that because there's, as far as who things were dedicated to, the opening track, Manic, is dedicated to Weather Report and Steps Ahead, which, for me, in this late 70s, early 80s, that was, my college days, was in the early 80s. Yeah. And then, close up to the 90s and stuff like that, those bands were just super influential for me as a musician who was a jazz musician originally. And so, Manic was that. Arif Martin, the record producer for Atlantic Records, I got to meet several times. And then his son, Joe, went to college with me at Berklee College of Music. And we became fast friends. And I heard lots of Arif stories, and just like I've always had this sort of dual thing, especially early on, of there's me as the creator, as a composer, orchestrator, arranger, whatever, but then there's me as a music producer, and that was always a big deal for me all the way back to college. So the second one's dedicated to him. And, just thinking about different things I learned from, in Arif's case, it was, I had a few encounters with him that were wonderful, but, just from afar, every album that he put out, everything he touched as a producer was, a thing.
Can you give us some examples?
I can give you a great example.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, so in Arif's, 800 to 1,000 albums that he produced. So the early albums were like Aretha Franklin albums. And all those Chaka Khan albums, like what you, the songs like What You Gonna Do For Me and stuff like that. That's his touch. and his arrangements, like all the background arrangements and stuff were him.
Wow.
And then later in his life, before he passed, he did the first 2 Norah Jones albums. So that when you listen to that first album, and don't know why,
yeah.
And you listen to her voice, and this was sort of a very specific Reef Martin thing. Yeah. Part of his production style was it was somewhat invisible, in the sense that it wasn't like, it wasn't like other producers I like are Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, the Janet Jackson albums and things like that, right?
Minneapolis all day.
But they, as producers, they have a sound. That's
Yeah.
distinctively theirs, and they have a fingerprint that's on the albums that they produce. Arif didn't have that kind of a fingerprint. It was more like his thing was he'd listen to the artist's voice and he would try and find the little magical setting on the EQ and whatever used on the production side to bring out and emphasize those like amazing qualities of a voice. And when you listen to the first Norah Jones album, and specifically, like that song "Don't Know Why" is one of those where you listen to that voice and it's so magical sounding. And granted, it's coming from Norah. Right.
Well,
there's that, right? But there's also like how it was captured and how the choices on the production side of how it was mixed and where it sits. And when you listen to the third album, so Arif did the first 2, and then Norah, and I don't know if he had passed away by the time she got to the third album, or if it was, just a choice to kind of try somebody new. But when you listen to the albums following the first 2, like her voice is treated a little differently, and it's still her voice. But there's just something about it it's kind of a little mysterious what he does, unless you're looking over his shoulder and going, what did he tweak?
Right.
Just a 3K, just a little bit there. So just a little something, so that, that's an example of like that listening from afar thing. And some of that's also, my training, like when you got really hardcore ear training skills, and it's a weird thing because it's like, because of my jazz background, there's a way we listen to music that's different than in the way we, and in some ways it helps me transcribe stuff if I'm using my ear training skills for that. Like we listen to a jazz drummer and I'm listening to what the left hand is doing and I'm listening to what the right hand is doing and what each foot is doing. And, and I have just this ability to kind of block out everything else that I'm hearing and just zoom in on things. And so part of my enjoyment of jazz is dialing into the different elements of, like, what the bass player is playing in a moment, what the drummer is doing, how the drummer might react to what the sax player did or something like that. And that's part of my enjoyment of that particular medium. And and it's the same with music production. I just start dialing in to these things, like like in the Norah Jones example, just dialing into her voice. And just all the frequencies and what's being emphasized, what might be de-emphasized, and then everything else in the mix, because it's all about, it's funny. It's just like, even these days, I've learned more about mixing. I've always been a good mixer, but I've learned more about mixing the last couple of years, partially from doing this album, but partially just from seeing what other people do in a mix process.
Yep.
So that sort of ear training component is just definitely a part of that. That's sort of the Arif example. And then there's other people. There's there's a guy who is like the head of music for a whole, where the high school that I went to up in Everett, Washington. He was the sort of the music, supervisor for the whole district and stuff like that. But he had a class at my high school, and he was the one that, Ken Krantz was his name, and he got me into playing electric bass because he was he's sort of a famous dude in jazz choir circles because he was a composer. He wrote original material, and he had a jazz choir called the Delsonics, and they would very much in the Manhattan Transfer, Singers Unlimited kind of world.
Sure. Yep.
Late 70s. That sort of musical style, and you hear some of that kind of stuff with Jacob Collier these days.
Yeah,
it's that sort of vocal harmony.
Yeah,
that's jazz influences with really rich kind of colors and stuff. So Ken was one of those kind of writers, and so the band, the bass player was graduating.
Okay,
and I was a freshman, and he goes, "We're needing a new bass player for next year, and I think if you're interested, we'll give you a bass and to use, and auditions are in 2 weeks if you want to give it a shot."
2 weeks.
So
and what was your instrument before that, Lennie?
I played trombone at the time, but I'd played brass instruments all from trumpet through baritone horn in junior high, and then trombone from junior high into high school.
Okay.
And then electric bass, and that was my future, so to speak, my other wife. I just loved playing the bass, and I just started digging into it, and I was took on the challenge, and 2 weeks later, I auditioned, was in the group, and we were doing our little festival thing, and having a good time, and then I was just also in the year training camp. I was playing along with records all the time. Especially because there's so many great bass players out there for people who play bass. And for me, that time period, we're talking Earth, Wind and Fire,
right? Yeah.
Larry Graham, Marcus Miller, just all these amazing, Anthony Jackson, these just amazing electric bass players. Jaco Pastorius was huge influence for me. So hence Weather Report and all that.
Weather Report, yep.
Yeah. So and then Jaco's own solo stuff. So that's an example. So all these different ones were part of it. So each track is dedicated to somebody, and that was sort of the beginnings of thinking about these people, and then the other part of it was I've been on deadlines for 30 plus years on media work. So, everything was you got to bang out this film score in a week or actually more like a month, and 80 minutes of music, 4 weeks, go.
Jeez. Yeah.
And different video games, some were more luxurious. Like the original Outcast was a 6-month process, which was really nice to be able to stop and think and go, do I like this cue? Yeah. Do I want to make some adjustments? Versus, some of the projects I have done where it was we were supposed to have 6 months, but for whatever reason, the lawyers were having back and forth, and they had to work out their stuff, and they would take 5 months of the 6 months to work out their thing. Of course. Then nobody was interested in changing the schedule. So so it was okay, you got a month. All right.
Amazing.
Just get in there and go.
Yeah.
So it was one of the mandates I gave myself was no time limit. And I spent about a year in the writing, and just some revisions were revision 10 on some of the pieces. Yeah. But the first drafts were 95 to 98% of what you hear on the album. Okay. And the revisions were just there's one particular bar that was bugging me, and it was the way I voiced something, and I was just I hate that. There's got to be something better, and it was just sort of this idea of trying to figure out, this is, I think, with any part of the compositional process as you're doing the refining stage, is you're trying to figure out what you hear in your head, and on most days it's pretty clear for me, what I'm looking for and where I'm heading, and a target I'm heading towards, along in that little linear timeline that we're dealing with the music. And then
Yeah.
other times it's a little more nebulous, and
Sure.
you're trying to discover. You have an idea where you're going. You're just not 100% sure what you're going to end up with. And there were some fun moments like that on this album.
Yeah, nice. I mean, and you posted, there's some really fun YouTube stuff that you posted with like MIDI.
Yes.
And I love hearing the MIDI renditions because then, the final product just sounds like it was sent from heaven or something. It just is like, whoa. But that's really fun to see.
And it's
the MIDI stuff.
Yeah, with the MIDI stuff, one of the things that was interesting about, like, I'm pretty good at my MIDI rendering kind of thing. It sounds pretty good, but as far as the solos, that's all me and the MIDI version, and it's just like, some of the stuff's out of control, and some of the stuff's just like, okay, well, that's not. Some of it's kind of cool, and some of it's kind of like, oh no, that's a piece of junk. And like even when it came to figuring out how to record the album, that's a whole section we can get into, because COVID hit, and then my idea of what the album was, how it was going to be produced, and how I was going to approach it, like, changed dramatically. And so but the MIDI stuff was fun to kind of like start as a good starting point to kind of like do that and figure out. For the players, it at least gave them a starting point. And then another thing we can get into is just on the music production side. There's certain things that were challenges in figuring out how to remote record an album and make it not sound like a remote recorded album.
Right. I mean, that's the magic formula everyone had to figure out over the last few years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because your intention always was to record it live. Like, your initial pitch video is like, this has to be live because it's jazz and there's so much interaction, and eye contact is so important, and body motions when you're standing next to your fellow saxophonists or whatever in the section, although they sit. So do the trombones. But anyway.
Right. Well, there's a saxophone trombone love-hate relationship going on. It's just like the little spit valve on the trombone.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, your intent was live because your pitch was 2019. And then, of course, I mean, what was the process like for you to make that pivot, I guess, even emotionally? Because your dream was, to do it this way. And then you're like, okay, well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like, what would have been the goal would have been to record over 2 days at Capitol Records.
And such an iconic building, even.
That's one of the reasons I was thinking of that place. I mean, we recorded in, any medium-sized studio to get 20 people together, but also schedules, and stuff like that. That would all have been part of that production angle, which would be make sure we get everybody on the same schedule, and then get people in there 2 days banging out. And the whole thing with Capitol Records is, it's a very storied room as far as a lot of Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole albums and things like that recorded there. Obviously it's a great sounding room. They got the plate reverbs in the basement, and those EMT plates, and that was part of a sound thing, that Neve console. And so there was all of that, and microphone collection, all, just every aspect. And the Nat King Cole Steinway that's still there. I wanted that piano in the room. And it's just like, can I get the Nat King Cole Steinway? I was having some conversations originally with the studio on schedules and things like that, and then COVID kicked in. Right around the beginning of that year. And it literally, because you asked this idea, so like this transition and shifting, like what I needed to do. It didn't take very long. It was literally within 5 seconds when I went, oh crap, I have to rethink this now.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So there was you didn't even.
And then I was, and then I was just like, okay, I got to rethink this. What, like, how do I want to do this? And, so it kind of turning on a dime, but then it's like, okay, now figuring out and rescheduling everything and figuring out a strategy for how can I redo this? That took a little bit of working out. But one of the things with that was I wanted to start with Peter Erskine,
the drummer.
drums. Yes.
Who played with Weather Report.
Yes, he did.
I mean, and a million other people.
Yeah. Weather Report and Steps Ahead,
yeah.
Peter was the drummer for many years for both of those groups. So, and he's one of my favorite drummers in the world.
He's legendary.
Just, the kinds of choices that he makes as he's performing are just wonderful. And I had known Peter for a bunch of years because I'd been doing orchestrations and arrangements for different composers in Los Angeles, and there was one particular composer that I worked with, and David Schwartz, who did Northern Exposure and Arrested Development and stuff like that. And David was doing a film, and he had Peter come in and play drums, and it was the first time I'd met Peter, and he was just such a good dude and such an amazing player. So it was just fun to just be there and hang with him and talk with him a little bit. And then over the years, we've done some things. I'd done a couple of arrangements for him for a concert that he had done in London, and so we got to collaborate a little bit. And then he's a huge fan of Eric Wolfgang Korngold. And
really?
Yeah, and
film composer, but also a classical composer. Beautiful violin concerto.
Yes, and
so, one of my favorites.
Yeah, so the way Peter told the story was he was touring with Weather Report, and he was in the hotel, and he was watching an older movie, and heard this amazing music. And he was talking to Joe Zawinul about the next day, and Joe's like, "Oh yeah, that's Eric Wolfgang Korngold. You should check him out," or something of that nature. And Peter just fell in love with that. So there's these elements of like Peter's love for sort of classic film composers like Korngold, and so we have a lot of conversations about that where we nerd out about that stuff. And, he's just a really, really good human being, and
awesome.
So when it came to the album early on, I wanted him on the album. It's like, hey man, you want to play on my album? I've got this idea, Told him about it. He's like, yeah, man, let's see if we can get the schedule going. So I wanted to start with him partially because like the MIDI was just more like, tempo wise, you can kind of set up a click track, and there's a few rubato kind of bits which are tricky to do with going from like trying to create a click. But I figured out like sort of a click that would work, and then I knew that if the MIDI, if everyone who played on it just played a little loosely, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's because that's part of the vibe of what those sections are about.
Yeah.
But outside of those, there's like 2 rubato sections. Everything else is in tempo, and so it made it pretty easy for maintain tempo thing. And then so Peter was basically playing to my MIDI tracks minus the drums.
Oh wow! Okay.
And even with that, I told you like I was doing soloing and stuff like that. He was like, "Hey, can I turn the solos off? Because it's distracting me." And I'm just like, "Yeah."
Totally.
I'm not going to bruise my ego.
No, right?
Like whatever you need to do, what you got to do, man. Just let me stay out of your way. And it's all beautiful. So he. He was like, he recorded, I think, over 2 days and did everything.
Great.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of nice solo space in that last track, which is just great.
Last track, Intentionality. And also in the first track in Manic, there's a section where he's flailing and blowing. Flailing sounds negative, but flailing has always been a positive term for me. It's like
for a drummer,
when you tell a drummer, "Man, flail. This is your This is your spot to kind of let loose and stuff." So there's sort of an arranged section where the rhythm section is still playing the harmony and kicking underneath him, and he's just kind of blowing through that, and then and it's right before the little tenor sax solo that's Andy Suzuki kind of kills.
Oh man, his sound, his fat, warm, hot chocolatey tenor sound it's just wonderful because I love to listen to John Coltrane. Yeah. Love. Yeah. But if I were to choose my favorite sound on a tenor, it would never be his, right? It's just not my favorite sound. I'll take Joe Henderson any day or Andy Suzuki. Okay. You know what I mean? Like that, I want that big, fat, warm honk kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know? And,
so to me, Michael Brecker's also in that category, you know, as far as
it's like a fire hose. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, I think with Andy's influences are people like Brecker, George Coleman, and Henderson is probably in there. Yeah. There might be a tiny amount of Dexter, and actually there's a little Tom Scott. What? You know, like his, you know, like when I first met Andy, he was 15 years old. And
God.
So two of my friends I've known forever are like Nick Manson who played the keyboards.
And he's fantastic. Yeah.
And Nick's awesome.
Andy?
And Andy. So Nick was 17. I was 18. I was a senior in high school. And Andy was 15. And we met because there was a local big guy who was a singer who was doing a big band thing. And he wanted arrangements of like Joe Williams kinds of tunes. Back in the day. And so both Nick and I were doing arrangements for him. And that's how we met. And then Nick's like, "Hey man, you should come and jam with us." It's just like at Nick's house, he had what we called the shack, which was it was like this external, like they call them ADUs these days, but it's it's just like a small like granny unit, like
a mother-in-law suite, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing good if you got a mother-in-law suite.
Yeah, that's true.
This is a shack. This is not a suite.
Okay. Gotcha.
But yeah, so we'd play in the shack and we would play weather report tunes and we would just jam and play different tunes. We were transcribing stuff, so we were just playing jazz together. And so with Andy, like at that time when he was about 15, he was way into Tom Scott, and he was playing alto sax at the time. So he was definitely like, and he was sort of a prodigy. He's just like, he's funny, man. He like barely practices and he sounds the way he sounds, you know? And
wow,
he's just wired to be that kind of an amazing player. And he does practice.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah.
You know, but you know, it's just like, you know, like for me, just comparing me and Andy. So as a player, I say it as in present tense. I am a really good bass player, but the reality is I'm a really rusty, formerly good bass player. And I had to work really hard to get there. You know, as far as you just like 6-8 hours a day of practice during the college days to get that motor memory going and the coordination of the things I do. And I am not, as a player, I'm not somebody who's like a super consistent kind of player tonally. So Jocko is one of those players where his fingers sit plucking the strings. I'm going to make sure on the camera.
Yeah,
his
plays
finger,
like this. Yeah.
So well, there's that too. He kind of plays it up high. But some of the stuff he does with his right hand is his fingers are kind of closer to the bridge, which makes it a very bright, mid-rangey, you know, growly kind of a sound, which is part of his thing. I tend to move as I play. I go, and it's not because I'm being inconsistent. It's just that in the moment, every note is, you know, like I might adjust the tone. So it might be rounder in one moment because I want it to be that, or it might be a little growlier because I'm leaning something. I might play a little harder. So my right hand is always doing these nuanced things, and then my left hand is doing nuanced things because sometimes I'm just playing a straight note on a fret, or I'm like doing some pull or a hammer or some sort of a like left hand technique kind of a thing. So part of my training was that that kind of thing. But like
Yeah.
going back to Andy and Nick, man, those friends have been around. They're some of my best friends, and they've been around forever.
Wow.
And we inspire each other. And they were also, one of the tunes, which is the samba called Two Peas in a Pod, that's dedicated to them.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the title fits for who they are, because they're definitely that. So let's see. Yeah, just some of the other mentors I should mention. So the last tune on the album is Intentionality. That's Toshiko Akiyoshi, and pioneering big band leader and composer arranger.
She's amazing.
And yeah, she's totally amazing. And when I was 16, there was in the Seattle area, Port Townsend, Washington is sort of like this little coastal town in the Puget Sound area, and it is sort of an artist community. And they would every year have these workshops for kids, artist workshops. So there was writing workshops and painting and whatever, and they had these music workshops, and that's where I found my people, because I was this weird kid in high school who was writing big band charts all the time, or doing things like that. And I was always writing music, and I was in the bands and stuff like that. And I thought I was just this alien little kid, and didn't, like everyone, I felt like kind of that way. And and then I went there and I realized there's people weirder than me. I love this. Because there are like these people doing really avant-garde, like extended technique, like like trombone multiphonics, and this one kid who was like an amazing oboe player that would just take the reed of his oboe and shove it into his cheek to make it distort and do all sorts of weird sounds and things like that. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is awesome. So one summer they did a workshop, and the jazz composition component of it, Toshiko was the artist in residence. Wow. And only 3 people signed up for it. And so I got one-on-one with Toshiko for 2 weeks.
Jeez.
And so the whole story behind that, and this gives an example or a look into kind of when I think about mentorship and what was important. So there was something Toshiko said to me. We had to prepare one big band chart to get performed at the end of the time during the workshop, by a professional group. And so it was all about, like working one piece. And so I'm working on this one piece, and Toshiko points to a particular bar in the saxophone section and goes, "Why is that there?" And I'm 16, so my typical 16-year-old answer is, "I don't know."
Yeah,
I don't know. And then she pressed me on it. She's like, "No, really. Why is this here?" And I was just like, "I don't know. I just like it." She's like, "Good enough." And then she falls
because you like it.
Yeah. And she goes, there has to be a reason why something's on the page. And there has to be a reason, after you review it, why it stays on the page.
Sure.
And at 16, man, that was a life-forming philosophy of writing for me. That is carried through my entire life. And it was just that one little conversation with her. And granted, there was another thing. I asked her if I could get a recommendation for Berklee College of Music, and she wrote one, so that was nice.
Yes,
that gave me a full ride my first year. So
wow.
So her, and then a couple other people. I mentioned Ken Krantz, the vocal jazz guy. So he had written a letter, and then the guy who ran that workshop also had written a letter. So I think between those three, the guy had pretty good coverage for that scholarship possibility.
Nice,
so that was super helpful, and at the time, and so Toshiko was super important to me. So the name of that last track is Intentionality, and there has to be an intention why you have something. That you write something, and there has to be intention as to, like, there has to be reasons why it's going to remain there, which is about, like, as you're scrutinizing your piece after you've done your first draft, of just making sure everything is exactly your intention of what you're trying to say and express. So So
Yeah.
stuff like that is, on every track there's these kinds of things where there's little things from different people.
Yeah.
So with Nick and Andy, like on the Two Peas in a Pod samba piece, Andy plays amazing flute and as well as saxophones, right? And with that track, there was this dynamic with Nick and Andy that's very unique to them, and they kind of nudge each other as they play. It's kind of like a dare.
Okay.
It's like top this,
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. So they kind of poke at each other as they play. It always makes me still smile and laugh and stuff like that. But it's this very loving kind of pushing each other to kind of go deeper.
Yeah.
I think is a good way of describing it. And that's just it's been their dynamic as they play together. They're kind of smiling at each other and there's eye contact and stuff like that. So I wanted a piece that was sort of focused around this dynamic between the two of them. So so that therefore it's Nick on the Fender Rhodes and Andy on a flute, and where they're playing together. They're kind of having more conversational kinds of playing. They both have these really featured solo moments in a piece like that. And it's just, it kind of fits with that. And then trying to write something cool around all that. Like write a good tune, write really good harmony. Where, they have something fun to solo over is definitely kind of part of all of that.
Yeah. So, how did Wayne Bergeron end up on the album? I mean, he's on a lot of albums, but
he's on a lot of albums.
Do you know him?
I know Wayne, and
God.
See, most
Another
of these people
just
are people,
legend, lead trumpet player, but also just trumpet in general, but just legend trumpet player.
Legendary lead trumpet player, legendary studio musician in Los Angeles. And I've known Wayne since we were babies, almost. when I was first in Los Angeles and first starting in my career, Wayne was playing on some of those sessions, these independent movies that I was involved in. And, and I love Wayne, man. He's like a good pal. And so like anytime I had horn section stuff, it was always Wayne Bergeron on trumpet, Andy Suzuki on saxophones, Alex Isles, who's another legendary trombone session player in Los Angeles. And Alex is on the ballad Essence. That's him on that melody, which is way high in the register. And he just plays it beautifully and does a great job. So it's all my horn sections. If it was a 3-horn section, it was Wayne, Alex, and Andy. Okay. And so they've always played with me, and I would always refer them for things if I was working on a commercial and they were like, hey, this is like kind of a big bandy thing. I'm like, all right, got to get Wayne and Alex and Andy in here, and so some of it's that. And Wayne's one of his nicknames is Mr. Incredible, because if you've seen the Incredibles movie, all that great lead trumpet stuff is him. Yes. And so that's very signature of Wayne, and the thing about Wayne is really beautiful is there's certain kinds of what I call lead trumpet player tone, which is very bright, forceful, and it sort of leads everybody. And so Wayne's an awesome leader, and he leads in how he plays, but he also leads, with his personality, which is, sometimes he'll just tease you a little bit, and that's enough to get you to kind of like up your game a bit, and stuff like that. So he's just a brilliant player, and actually like as far as challenges with the this particular project where I'm remote recording everybody, so part of it was what I wanted to do. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to start with Peter, and as far as figuring out the order was, I was going to do Peter, then I was going to get the bass stuff together, and then I would add the keyboards and guitar stuff after the drum bass thing, because that's more foundational in the way I think about it. Sure. And then after the rhythm section was like together, then the lead players in each section. So Andy would do all the lead saxophone stuff, Wayne would do the trumpet, and Alex would do the lead trombones. And Wayne was sick at the time. He had posted publicly he had tongue cancer. Okay. And was going through chemotherapy and radiation treatments and stuff like that. So he was sick for quite a bit. So it was just more, man, I love him to pieces, and I just wanted him to be well. And I was just checking with him, how you feeling, and all that. And then he went through his therapies, and then finally, they didn't have to do any surgery to, where sometimes they have to like take out part of your tongue and stuff like that. And for a trumpet player, that's an issue. Yeah. So he basically he survived through all that, and came out on the other side, and then it was more about kind of getting back up to speed on his playing capabilities. So that was coming together, and just stayed in touch with him. And then we ended up doing all the saxophone section tracking, and I think most of the trombone section was done when Wayne was feeling good. And ready to tackle the trumpet stuff. So, and that's funny too, because it's just like, Wayne, part of what happens in horn section writing and in big band writing particularly is the lead trumpet player dictates the phrasing. Right. But since Wayne was recovering, then Alex has known Wayne forever, so Alex was like, "This is probably what I think Wayne would do," and and then Andy's a great player, and he's played with Wayne a lot. So we kind of took our best guess at what we thought would be the way that Wayne might phrase it, and then it gets to Wayne, and Wayne's like, "Those saxes are playing, and those short notes too fat," And then he would lay down his track, and then I'd listen to it, and then because Pro Tools, I could actually make the saxes less fat by just kind of like trimming up the ends of things, right? So my Pro Tools chops got pretty ninja level on this project, and and like you wouldn't hear it, but I wasn't trying to go for on the grid perfection or anything like that, because that wasn't my role. For producing it had to feel right. So it's got a little bit of looseness, but the things that were like egregiously too fat, I would like trim up. And damn it, Wayne was right. It's just, there's something about the energy and the way certain notes sound. You play a certain short note, a particular length, and it just energetically feels right. So like folks like Wayne and Alex, there's a lot of folks on the album that were just people that I either recorded with in the past, or they were friends, and it's just like, it's an album full of love, as far as, like all these great musicians to play. The rhythm section, like I played the electric bass stuff, which was a thing, because like I mentioned, I was so rusty, and I give myself really hard things to play, So, like I had to, and just full disclosure, like there have been times, like I graduated from college 40 years ago, which is scary to think of. Yeah, man. And I was like a solid bass player. I was practicing 6-8 hours a day, and then as I was building my career as a composer, I was doing that length of time every day. I was 10 to 12 hours a day. I'd be like being a composer. So like, the technique and stuff was like pretty damn rusty. And so I spent I wrote the crazy bass parts that I ended up playing, and then I practiced for like a month to just kind of rebuild some of my technique to where things felt a little more fluid. And then on top of that, the one thing that you lose is on the tips of your fingers as a bass player, you get calluses. But because I have a farm here, and I'm always shoveling something. I still have my calluses. Nice. I have them in a couple other spots too, but you know, the fingertips, they're pretty calloused up. So
that's great.
Yeah. So that wasn't a thing. I could play for fairly long periods of time without having blister issues or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I had to spend a month just practicing every day and just kind of working out what I was doing. And then even with that, I had to do like multiple takes of different sections of these pieces and just practice that section until it started to feel comfortable and fluid. Mm-hmm. And then I did the Pro Tools Ninja thing and around. You're a little behind the beat over there. So just, so it is an exercise in really brilliant editing.
Yeah. I mean, there's some
sound and feel right.
For sure. And there's a lot of great little bass spots, but particularly with the oud. So will you talk about having oud on the album? Because it's so cool. As soon as I heard it, I'm like, is that an oud?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it's an oud. You look in the that's an oud. What?
Yep.
Love it.
So so that was the piece I dedicated to Arif Mardin. So Arif's family and everybody, they were from Turkey, and when I think of Arif, as I was writing the piece, I just had this weird idea. Like Arif, like when I think of him as a producer, he drew from everywhere. Every influence around the world was sort of a thing. So he would, there's a Chaka Khan song. It's an old classic jazz tune called "The Night in Tunisia." It's a Dizzy Gillespie tune.
Yeah.
And he's got some really fun stuff in that song's arrangement that's drawing from all parts of the world and things like that. And then there's a particular piece that he did. It was for a guitar and big band called Sweet Fraternidad. And it's this great album. And it was, I think a WDR big band or something like that. And
German band. They're amazing.
Yeah. So it was this live concert, and the album that was put out. That definitely had this sort of really cool blend of this guitaristic kind of sound with the big band. So it's just that idea of like putting something a little unusual in a big band setting was in my mind. And my friend Jimmy Maklis is this amazing, he plays amazing electric guitar, but he also plays oud and bouzouki, and he played on the Argo film.
Oh, okay.
So he's, he's just this wonderful. He tours with different artists from Persia, and he's just this, Mediterranean bundle of joy. He's just amazing.
Awesome.
He's just the greatest person and great musician soloist. So I'm just like, doing this, and then the oud is like a very old, treasured little oud he has several, but this was one this is like his baby, that he goes, I never take this to gigs.
Oh wow.
And and he was like, so you record with that, and it's just like a lovely sounding instrument, and and then trying to get it to cut through a big band was a music producer issue of okay, how do I make that happen? And part of it is you don't have the horns playing all the time, because they're out competing. Because especially Wayne is just like fills a room as soon as he plays. Oh my
God! Such a monster.
So the oud came from this sort of blend of a couple of different thoughts. It's this idea of drawing from anywhere in the world, and I do that in my film and video game writing too. It's just like, I'm not, there's a phrase that I remember from one of my mentors, Mike Gibbs, who was a composer in residence at Berkeley, that the song Essence is named after. He used to say, amateurs borrow, professionals steal. And it was more like, it was more about ownership. It's like, if you're going to draw from something, really learn it, So it's a lot of conversations with Jimmy about, okay, what's a good key for the oud? What's I have this idea for like I'd send him the tune, and he would it's like, is this playable?
Yeah.
I have this idea. He's like, this is mostly playable, but like this, like this register is a little trickier. You might change the octave or something like that. So collaborating with, when you're writing for somebody specific, you do the same thing if you're writing a violin concerto. You work with your violin soloist, and you kind of
definitely
give them something challenging and fun to play, and
but also playable.
So similar.
Yeah,
it's got to be playable. And what's funny about both Manic and the Mardini Effect is, and Mardini Effect is what Jimmy played on, is those are, there's a grading scale for certain big band arranging and things like that. I think it's 1 to 5 if I remember right. Okay. So those two tunes are a 7. Because Wayne would say these are impossible to play if you're just a pickup big band coming in to play on a gig.
Yeah.
It's got, like Wayne was saying, it's got to be like an army band that plays every day for 6 months.
Yeah. There are a lot of bands like that, though, right? Like Maria Schneider's band is like that. You can't just pick up a Schneider chart and rip it up. It's just not like
I think some of the arrangers that I really love that I grew up on would be Don Ellis and Thad Jones.
Oh yeah,
and they wrote really hard stuff.
Yeah, these are arrangements, right? Yeah, it's not just head solo head and we're out with 20 players. It's like an intricate through composed situation with solo sections.
Sure, or like in the context of Don Ellis, he loved like Indian rhythms and odd time signatures.
Oh
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all that kind of stuff. So you had to be able to like subdivide, and crazy tempos. And his arrangements are kind of fantastical at times, where it's just like it's almost like about spectacle,
right? Yeah,
but it's exciting, and that was definitely a part of his style. And then Thad Jones, he had very lyrical melodies on his lead trumpet parts, but the density of his voicings was super dissonant and crunchy. And to try and play in tune, if you're like in the middle of the trombone section with these, and you're like half steps away from each other, is a thing that you have to kind of manage as a player and stuff like that. So like I write sometimes really challenging things, but at the same time. That particular tune, Mardini Effect, the ending actually speeds up micro amounts because I wanted it to kind of do this whirling dervish kind of build up at the end, and it's only like 1 BPM, like a bar, but it's just enough where you feel it's the tension rise, and this is another thing about me as a writer. When I'm writing something and I'm writing for people to play, I'm not like Steely Dan style. Everything has to be pristine and surgically perfect. Yeah. And I love that music. But I want some soil in there.
Yeah.
I want, so like, for instance, if things get a little out of control at the end of that particular piece, that's cool by me, because that's part of the vibe.
Right.
So there's those kinds of things. So with Jimmy and the playability of something, there's some things where it just feels like it's almost out of control. And then like player choices, like Jimmy would go, I'm not playing this entire scale. But I'm just going to grab the last bit. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to start it and finish it, and I'll let because the horns are covering everything. So you can make choices about when people come in, and also in the orchestration of the horn writing. I was doing that same approach where, like in the trumpet section, it's like this 2 octave, what we call an octatonic scale, which is it's this symmetrical scale of half steps and whole steps, and it's a more unusual scale, I think, for players to play. They don't play it as often as they play major or minor modalities and things like that. So like within the trumpet section, if you look at the orchestration, you can see that like I have the first trumpet started off, sit out for a beat, and then pick up the rest. And then I've tried to balance out the orchestration where everybody's sort of like grabbing a breath. Yeah. And evenly distributing the idea so that the sound of it sounds full, but it's not like trying to make everybody play that
Right.
particular thing nonstop from beginning to end, because that starts to sound a little out of control, or you start to lose, you start to lose people along the way. And that's totally that kind of way of writing is totally stolen from Stravinsky. The way he would break up stuff.
Sure. Pass it around. Yep.
Yeah. Break up an idea. So there's a great thing in Firebird, I think it is, where in the trumpets, which you know very well, there's a triplet figure, and the first trumpet is playing something like dig it, dig it, dig it, dig it, dig. So the sound when you hear it is dig it, dig it, dig it, dig it.
Yeah.
So the first trumpet's doing the first two of the triplets, going dig it, dig it, dig it, dig it, dig. Yeah. And then the second trumpet is going pop, ba-da, 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 ba-da.
So it just fits in there. Yeah.
And so it's this combination. So what you hear is the whole idea going, but you hear an emphasis on the downbeats of everything. Because that's when two people are playing.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's like breaking up the idea into two cooperative pieces, and so it's similar in what I was describing here with the Mardini ending. It's just like everybody is playing the whole idea, but I break it up into this little component so that it all gets put together. And I love puzzles like that.
Yeah. No, I love the end of that track. It's great.
Yeah. So Jimmy, Uden Big Band, why not?
Why not? Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you got bass clarinet too, so
yes,
I guess that's not as uncommon. It's kind of uncommon though,
It is.
But it's
it's also because going to Berklee College of Music, if you played a saxophone, part of their training was you should also play doubled instruments like flute and clarinet.
You gotta be able to double
because sometimes you're in a situation where you're being asked to do that live, and you got to be able to at least you have to be able to hold the instrument well, I guess.
Yeah.
You can be a clarinet holder versus a player, and and at least play the little part that you have. And I love that sort of switching color thing. And Gil Evans and some of the stuff he did with Miles Davis would blend lots of cool color like that. Oboe, he'd have oboe in a
French horn.
Arrangement. French horn, totally.
Tuba.
And hence in my trombone section there is a tuba on the bottom. It's three tenor trombones, a bass trombone, and a tuba.
Love it.
Because I love that sound. And so with the woodwinds, there's definitely things like that. And my brother Phil is playing the Barry sax, the second tenor chair, and then a bunch of the woodwinds, all the bass clarinet things. And then Andy also plays amazing flute, like I mentioned, but some clarinet. And then, I was using between Andy and Phil, I got pretty good coverage of like those moments when I wanted to have woodwinds playing stuff. And so that's part of the sound. And Tom Scott used to do that on some of his albums, where he would go to like a woodwind background. And so there's a few of those tracks on here. Where it's mostly saxophones, but there's a few moments where I kind of go into the woodwind kind of thing, and that's just a lovely color.
It is. So, it really is. Yeah. I mean, it's such an amazing album. Now, why? Okay, because intentionality starts with acoustic bass. So someone else played acoustic bass, and I'm so curious why you never made that jump. Or did you try, or what? Why did you decide, well, I'm just going to stay on electric bass? Was it because you loved fusion so much and acoustic just isn't a thing, or what? What was that about?
So in college, there were plenty of bass players that played both acoustic and electric bass.
Okay.
And because I was also a writer, I was practicing 6 to 8 hour days on electric bass, the reason is because out of respect. I didn't think I could commit the time.
Oh, sure, yeah.
To pick up acoustic bass, and so I focused on writing and I focused on playing electric, and that was part of it. My buddy Dean Taba is the one playing the acoustic bass, and so Dean is he's both an amazing acoustic player and electric player, and he's he is what you get when you have somebody that's passionate about the bass and practices all those things every day, versus me being somebody who's passionate about writing and does that most of the time.
Yeah.
So you leave it to the professionals for that. That kind of thing, it kind of came from that. It's out of respect for the instrument and how cool the upright bass is. I just felt like it wasn't something I could set aside enough time to do well. And so I just focused on things that I could do. And then, in the context here, it's just like half of the tunes are upright bass and half are electric bass. So originally I was just going to have Dean do everything. And,
I'm glad you played though, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm glad I played too.
Yeah,
it was painful, but it was,
But it sounds so good. You can't hear any of that, right? It just sounds great. It sounds great.
Yeah. But Dean would have killed it on electric bass too. He's done some great work for me in the past, but he, I just thought it'd be fun to just go for it and play the electric bass stuff myself. And, because like I mentioned earlier, there wasn't necessarily a deadline imposed. But, and we can get into this a little more, just this idea of managing COVID and trying to figure out the remote recording kind of thing. But on the bass thing, kind of closed that idea. For bass stuff, Dean just kills it on the upright, and intentionality specifically. This is me and my impish sense of humor sometimes. I'm like, because normally in a traditional jazz setting, you play the head, you solo. Usually the last people to play solos in the solo section are the bass player and the drummer, right? And then you play the head again and end the song. Right? So I was just like, I had this bug in my head going, I'm starting with a bass solo.
Yes, good. I'm glad you did.
And then on top of that, what I wanted, the only thing I wanted that I told Dean about was I wanted him to know what the tempo was, because the tempo does not change. But I wanted him to start off where you weren't sure as the listener. It almost sounds like it's sort of open and he's just sort of improvising without a tempo. But as everybody kind of sneaks in the opening of the arrangement, that there is a tempo that's been there the whole time. And so, so it's sort of playing with time a little bit in that opening section where it's kind of like, what's going on? Is this like a cadenza or whatever? And then the next thing you know, you hear, the different instruments in the rhythm section kick in, and all of a sudden, and you may not even realize that as an audience that it's been in tempo the whole time, but it's just sort of conceptually what I wanted to try and begin the tune with. And I also like the idea of, like I've heard a lot of really great Keith Jarrett stuff, especially his standards kind of stuff with this trio, where he doesn't necessarily start with the melody.
Right.
Sometimes they'll start with improvisation. The melody will be somewhere in the middle, or along the way, or near the end. So, I love the idea as an arranging idea of like it doesn't always have to start with the head. It's like, no, let's start with Dean.
No, I love it.
Then we get into an established, melody or we call it head in jazz. I suppose it's in the head and tails category of things, but so
we don't call it a tail either in jazz.
No, we
There's
don't.
no tail. No, it's just the head.
No.
And then when you play it again at the end, you're playing the head again.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's going to the ending. So.
Like the 5 years almost 5 years I spent in jazz radio, you learn real quick that no one wants the bass solos and no one wants the drum solos, which is such a tragedy because it immediately eliminates just hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands and thousands of great tunes that people need to hear. And but people just, it's hard in the car. I get it, but still it was a frustrating constraint to be like, I can't play this 8-minute track because there's a 45-second drum solo in it. And you could, but you just without without a doubt would hear something about it from someone.
Right.
So it's crazy. So I'm glad you put it in there.
That's their loss.
I know it is. It's like such a tragedy.
Yeah. There's, like sometimes my shrink says things like, "That's not about you. That's about them."
It is. Yeah, big time.
Like, no drum solos, really? Have you heard Peter play?
Oh man, I could just go on and on about phone calls I got about the most ridiculous things. But that's just how people are. Yeah, it's just like the comments section in a newspaper article or something. That's it's just
trolls have been here forever.
Exactly. Yep. And they troll your local radio host for sure.
Yeah. It's just like you should just do a show of nothing but drum solos.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is the drum hour. Yeah, exactly. I did love all the Fender Rhodes in there. Is really fun. You hear it, right off the bat in Maniac. Wait, Manic? Wait, Manic. I wrote Maniac in here because it's one of my favorites. Is Manic.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I have several favorites, but I loved the sax soli section in that track too.
Right.
Was really fun because that's another mainstay in a big band, right? Is can you write a good sax soli section and
and
I just loved it. Thought it was great. And you do it more than that, but yeah.
That's let's see. Where is it? I think it's there.
I didn't write down the timestamp. Usually I do.
It doesn't matter. I can do you one better.
You going to show it to me?
Yes, I am.
Oh, God, that's very exciting. Good.
All right. I just need to zoom in where it's big enough here. There we go. I can go one more. So let's see. And then timing-wise, so we don't need to show sound. I can just show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the beginning of the sax solo section. And then this counter is back and forth between the bass and the barrier doubling this idea. It's a very nutty line, tricky to play. Where it's just back and forth, the conversation between what's going on in the bass. And then there's also like a Moog synthesizer doubling this too.
Oh God.
That's like,
okay.
It's this very rattly subwoofery frequency Moog sound that's just fat as all get out. So it's just like, and this is concert pitch, so it's just nothing but ledger lines. Let's see. So
it is
do that and then that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if I did it transpose, that would be like that.
Okay, yeah.
Sibelius is our friend.
Right. And of course, you don't put in a key signature because it's studio musicians and they don't.
Yeah, you don't really do a lot of.
Yeah,
if I stay in a key, I'll put a key signature. But if I'm.
Okay.
If I'm just going for a typical thing.
Yeah.
And then. All the phrasing and stuff like that. Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then,
trumpets come in.
Yeah. And this is fast. This is like 300 beats a minute fast. So
they sound like sixteenths, but yeah.
Yeah, Peter was killing it on the up tempo. It's like 300 beats a minute is hard. 200 beats a minute is hard for a lot of drummers for swing.
Yeah,
but it was like close to 300. And,
wow.
Something like that. So it's just like that's the measure. So your quarter notes are like
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool.
It's just crazy.
But it makes it easier to read if you write it like that. And this is my
Frank Zappa line. So good. So it's just fun. Wow. Kind of thing. So just crazy. But that's me. I'm crazy.
No, that's great. That's so good.
Yeah.
I really loved it.
Yeah. So it's just nutty. Just a brief aside schedule wise. So I am available until 10:30.
Okay.
Because I'm doing a master class for a Texas college. Interactive music design in video games.
Okay. Oh, cool. Cool.
Which is fun.
Yeah.
But the saxoli, that's a traditional thing. It's a blend of me doing things that are traditional with things that I'm really trying to push boundaries.
Yeah.
As far as the approach to the album. So there's definitely stuff where, like in that particular tune, Manic, one of the boundary things is obviously that fast tempo.
Yeah.
It's like, but the song title says it all.
Yes, right. You set it up.
I wanted it to be a little bipolar. I wanted it to be like this. It's sort of a fusiony bossa nova for the first part, and then the second part is this beboppy, high tempo, go nuts kind of thing. Yeah. And then harmonically, I'm always trying to do something that's kind of interesting. Partially, I'm a very intervallic composer, so the way all the notes relate to each other, the interval relationships. I love dense harmonic structures, chords, and things like that. Lots of rich color and things like that. So that's part of my writing, not just in jazz kinds of things, but it's also part of my writing when I'm doing video game music or scoring a film or whatever. I like having a few jazz chords in there.
Yeah.
And Williams does a little bit of that too. He has a background where he used to do Stan Kenton arrangements when he was younger and stuff like that. So,
wow.
So there's a little bit of that of like, toss some of that in there with the orchestra.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right. So I'm thinking we should touch briefly on just, like, how do you put a remote recorded album in?
Yes, that was my next thing, because there's so many different things. Now, were some of those musicians already pretty well set up at home? Like,
yes.
Did Wayne already have a pretty dope recording gig, I'm sure, in his place? Yes. And but that's not, it's not just having that, right? It's still, you have to blend all these people who everyone's on a different microphone, and everyone's in a different space with different soundproofing and different acoustic treatments. Totally. And so talk about it. It just sounds like an absolute nightmare to me.
Well, it ended up not being too much of a nightmare. There was some challenges. Like one of the things is, everyone has a different microphone, but usually everybody that has a home studio or home recording setup, like Wayne has his own. He built a studio at his house, and he's had it for years. Yeah. So, it's just an opportunity. You can work in your pajamas.
Yeah.
And you can kind of like. Yeah. You could take on more work. You can maybe be doing 2 sessions in a day for somebody like him, but then you get home at night and you might have, an hour or so before you go to sleep or something where you're like, hey, I could kind of do this side project and stuff like that. So, so a lot of my friends have done remote recording kinds of things pre-COVID. And so they had already had experience. So Wayne was one of those. Alex had to learn kind of when COVID hit. He's like, oh, dang, I gotta figure out, I gotta figure out this thing, because for performing musicians, there was no live performing anymore. So all those jazz buddies of mine were like out of work. Yeah. So the idea of if you did have a remote recording set up, then that was definitely optimal for you to be able to keep making a living. Peter had always had his studio. So there was quite a few musicians that could. Jimmy had his home recording set up too, and then my friend Kenny Lassane, who plays all the guitar stuff. Most of the electric guitar stuff.
Yeah,
so Kenny is always he's awesome. So he's had a remote recording thing going on, and Kenny is like a pedal guy.
Yeah. Well, he did all that wah stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's that, but there's also so Kenny is he's like an encyclopedia of musical style, rock, soul, jazz.
And he can just do it all.
Yeah. And he's also a really good soloist, but like as a rhythm player, he's just this big encyclopedia. And so he's got like a wall of pedal effects, like somewhere between, I think, 300 to 500 pedals. And there's
That's
like
a lot of pedals, man.
And they all do different things. And so he is an orchestrator is what he is, because it's about texture and color and as well as things like tone. And then he's got his favorite amplifiers, and he's got many guitars that he uses, and they all sound different. And it's just this blend of different kinds of colors. And so, and he always does really surprising stuff. So there's stuff that he does where I'm like, what the heck is that? It's like, it doesn't even sound like it's a guitar, at times. And, so I always love seeing what he comes up with as far as the kind of colors he wants to paint with. And even like the opening entrance of the electric guitar it's mostly Kenny, but there's some things that I did in Pro Tools that I added to it. It's like what he was using is sort of what I call a clean sound, but there was a little distorted edge to the attack, and it's just all these little subtle things he was doing. I think he had some delays and things on that, a little reverb. And then I added, there's this plugin that simulates, it's called Real ADT, and it simulates, there's a varispeed knob on old analog tape decks. And if you listen to like some old Beatles albums, like I'm the Walrus and some of those kinds of songs, there's some wobbly vocal kinds of sounds. That's basically, they were running the vocal through a tape deck, and somebody was tweaking the variable speed knob in different directions, and it sort of like fractionally speeds and slows up how fast the tape is going over the heads. And that particular plugin allows, it's the equivalent of 2 analog tape decks with variable speed knobs, and it's spatialized. So it's like you end up with 4 different sound sources coming back at you in stereo. So I wanted something that was kind of a little swimmy to add to what Kenny was doing. So most of it's Kenny coming up with his own sounds, but there were a few things that I would add, and Kenny's like, that sounds really cool. Let's what are you using and stuff like that. So so some of that is that, but continuing on the remote recording kind of thing, like part of it is the people that did have experience doing it were helping the other people who didn't. Like for I mentioned Alex it was early stages for him to kind of learn how to remote record himself, and Wayne was totally helping him out, and it's like, you need to call this person, they'll set you up, and you get this microphone, so then like, and Alex is now, he's a pro at it. And the other thing about the remote recording thing is the space that you record in, right? So if you don't acoustically treat your space, you can hear little reflections of sound coming off of walls and things like that, and it can be an issue. But if you got a close mic, so if I'm going to do this, if you got a little close mic, you can capture what's directly in front of it really easily. So if you're close micing everybody, then for the most part, if with the right microphone, you're not necessarily going to get things bouncing off walls. So it becomes a little easier to control. And then on the mix side, I have to put a space in there for everybody to play in, which is part of the idea of like, how do you get everybody who's remote recording to sound like they're in a single space? And like going back to what I mentioned about Capitol Records and the EMT plates in the basement. So I wanted, in the way I set up my Pro Tools session, the setup was I'm using like the equivalent of a Neve console channel strip plug on everything, so that it colors everything a particular way.
And a Neve is a mixing board. Let's just clarify for folks who don't know what a Neve is. It's a big giant board with all the dials and the faders. And
if you've ever seen old school pictures of studios, it's like a lot of like lot of knobs and sliders and things like that. And a Neve console, for those that want to look it up on Google, it's Neve.
Yep.
And so it was a Neve console, channel strips that I was using to get a particular color, because every mixing console sounds different. An SSL sounds different from a Neve, and Harrison sounds different from the other two. So that was part of it. And then I used EMT plates, which are like a reverb acoustic space simulator. That's basically, it's this big metal plate, and it's a microphone and a speaker in a basement somewhere, and a lot of cement. And and basically you run whatever you want to send. Like you could take your trumpet sound, you run it out the speaker in the room with the EMT plate. It plays out the speaker, and the microphone picks it up on the other side of the plate, and it sort of vibrates along this metal plate. And that creates this sense of like a long room sound. And those Frank Sinatra albums and Nat King Cole, the room sound is a combination of the room at Capitol Records plus the plate reverb kind of a component. So I would add spatial kinds of things to all the tracks to kind of blend things together, including a few mixing tricks that, like Nick turned me on to this one mixing trick, which I forgot about, which is like kind of drawing from Beatles record days, which is the easiest way to describe it for pretty much anybody, if you're not audio nerdy like me, is in my mix, and I forget, is this to your left as you're viewing me?
Yes.
Okay, so I got to reverse.
Although it might
what I'm doing.
flip, we'll see. But yeah.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, I'll do two versions.
Okay.
Right. So on one side, I've got like the saxophone sort of spread out. Like if you're thinking left to right and how you're hearing in your headphones or in a speaker, like more a little left of center to the far left is like alto 1, 2, tenor 1, 2, and Barry. So Barry is furthest away, and then the opposite side is trombone 1, 2, 3, 4, tuba. So that kind of makes the horn sound kind of wide, and the trumpets are sort of overlaid center left to center right.
Oh, cool.
Between them, and it would be like if I had them in a room, they would be in a C shape in the room.
Yeah, right. Yeah, with trumpets in the middle, and then
trumpets in the middle, saxes on one side, trombones on another, and so one of the tricks that we were doing was we were taking a mono, not stereo reverb, and I would put it on the opposite side so the saxes would feed into a mono reverb on the right side. The trombones would feed into a mono reverb on the left. And what I'm doing is I'm simulating what happens when you have people in a space. The saxophones might be on the left side of the room, the trombones on the right side of the room, but the sound of the sax is going to bleed over into little microphones picking up the trombones and vice versa. So I'm creating that and simulating that extra sound that's getting added into whatever's close to the microphone.
Cool.
And so you just add these little subtle things, and all of a sudden it sounds like everybody's together in the same space. So some of it's adding the one big room reverb, and some of it is doing these little monoverbs that are directional to kind of fill in a little glue.
Right. Right.
And, so some of it is that kind of production stuff. The editing side of doing an album like this with remote recording is not everybody interprets what's on the page exactly the same. So if I have a sforzando is a technique where you play it really loud, get really quiet, really fast, and then you build up your volume to the end of however long the note is supposed to be held. So if it's holding it for 4 beats, then it's just like kind of a thing. But some people drop down in volume, and then they wait till the very end to get back up. And some start sooner. So in order to get everybody to sound, I didn't want everybody to sound perfect, but sometimes I would some people would go long. So it's like play it for 4 beats and they'd go for 5, and just kind of hang over a little bit at the end. So that was like this one, the odd person out, just like kind of hanging on a little too long. And there's a rule in big band is that the lead trumpet player is always the last. Always. To finish the note.
Just got to hang on just a little bit longer.
And so, but it's because everyone's following the leader, but also it is something about the style. I think that's also part of that.
Oh yeah, it's the style and the attitude. It's the flamboyance of the lead. In a way, it's just like such a
and that's part of the fun of those kinds of things. But also, so some of it was editing things. You're remote recording everybody, and some people were like, either we were getting our friends to help them as figuring out how to remote record, or figure out what's a good microphone to use, and or I'd be on the phone with them. Or like in Kenny's case, he was getting used to a new piece of software at the time. So I was in Zoom calls with Kenny, just kind of saying, click on that drop down menu over there, and he's like, oh, that's where it is, So I was kind of helping him get acclimated with navigating through a particular piece of software, and then pretty much I did that in like an hour, and then the next day he was like, oh, okay, everything makes sense now, everything's cool, And so once we got the technical aspects of all of that, then it was just getting all that data. So the editing with the horns was making sure that everything felt like, and this is a thing in remote recording compared to when you're in a room, and this applies to the rhythm section and the horn players. When you're in the room, people get visual cues off of each other. You're listening, you might be listening to a click track, so you know what beat you're on.
Yep.
But there's also visual cues that, especially for things like entrances and cutoffs, like when the note ends. Like if your lead trumpet player is going, bah, right? They sometimes will move their hand a little bit.
Definitely.
So the horn is kind of like, it's almost dipping with the note, so you can kind of visually, even if it's in your periphery as a player, you kind of see how they're phrasing something, and you can hear how they're phrasing. It's like when you watch a string quartet; they're always looking at each other.
Always moving together, and
and they're like, there's visual cues that happen that didn't exist because everyone's remote recording kind of in a vacuum, so to speak, and so my job on the production side and the editing of the audio was, I'm going to be everybody's eyes, in that situation. And I'm just imagining if I'm those horn players in the room in the cutoffs, like how are they listening and looking at each other? Because they can hear maybe not everybody playing together because they were stair stepping, like adding. It's an additive process of, you put your lead trumpet and then you add your second, third, and fourth trumpet. So like if it might be lead and third trumpet together, and then the second trumpet, comes in a little later, so it's not quite in a particular order. So like Andy Suzuki, when he was doing the lead alto, what he would do is he would actually played 4 parts. He'd play lead alto, second alto, first tenor, and second tenor. And he was on the album, he's first tenor chair and the first alto chair. But he would do all 4 parts because like it helped him figure out when he played the first tenor part where he needed to be in the blend of a section. And then we would replace the second alto part with my friend Billy Martin, and the second tenor would be my brother Phil, and then Phil would put the Barry on the bottom. But for some of the players, that was just easier to do. To kind of, let me just do all the parts and just kind of figure out like what's going on. So that's an interesting thing with remote recording. The other part of the remote recording on the rhythm section is the feel, the groove of it is that visual interaction is really critical. So as amazing as everybody was playing, myself was the exception because I edited the hell out of my bass parts because I'm rusty. Yeah. So, but like even when I'm editing my own thing, it was about like what did I play and what parts of the feel of what I did like work really well with what Peter was doing on the drums, and then if I needed to nudge something, what felt more like it was in the pocket because we were looking at each other. So it's this weird thing of me imagining the psychology of what's happening in a space with people and trying to simulate that in the editing process is like part of that remote recording thing. And then the rest is just like mix, just making sure that everything that what you want the listener to focus on in a given part of the tune. Like if there's a solo, you want them to hear the soloist well.
Yeah.
If you want to, if you want the, when the horns are not playing, you want the rhythm section. Like I wanted the rhythm section to sound more intimate, like an ECM album, kind of like you hear all the elements really clearly versus a typical, like if you listen to an old Count Basie album, you barely hear the guitar.
Yeah.
It's just, it's Freddie Ring going,
Poor
zant,
Freddie.
zant, zant, zant.
Yeah.
Poor Freddie on his little quarter note chords, which is great, but it's just like in the mix, it's there. And you barely, like Count Basie was a pianist, but like in the context of the big band, like the piano, how loud it was, the rhythm section is sort of there to drive things, but it's not really super loud. And I wanted something that was a little more contemporary rhythm section sound. And then when the horns would kick in and everything was big, it's, we would make that sound good too. So it's trying to find a balance between those two components. And so the mixing was me and Frank Wolf, who's just a legendary mixer in Los Angeles. He's worked with Randy Newman. So if you Monsters Incorporated and like pretty much any Randy Newman score and quite a few, I think, Randy Newman albums, Frank was the mixing engineer.
Cool.
And he's like extended family with me. So he was like making the drums, like it's a thing. I'm a good mixer for a composer, but Frank has spent his whole life being a mixing engineer. And like Dean being the upright bass player, same idea.
Yeah.
So, and I trust Frank. And then Frank adds his own secret sauce, so I can make my drums sound pretty good, but like Frank puts his fingers on the knobs and does a couple of tweaks, and all of a sudden it goes from like sounding good to sounding insanely amazing, and he just nudged a little thing.
Sure. Just like tweaks a little digital knob. Yeah.
So for me, it's been a joy to kind of spend the last couple of years studying Frank, so to speak, and looking at what he did to really like take things up a notch. And then and then he was super busy because he was doing like a ton of movies and stuff like that. So he would just like get a few hours at a time to kind of like do that. The schedules was another part of this remote recording issue of trying to get everything together. So it took several years just to get the tracking done.
Yeah.
And then mixing and then that was about like sometimes that was a schedule thing. I'd have to wait 6 months because Frank was doing like some like insane like amount of work on a movie or something like that.
Sure,
but it's finally done. It's mastered. Nick did the mastering. He did an awesome job.
Oh, cool.
So he's done a lot of music production himself and mixing, mastering. So so it's just what the remote thing is really about. Using your imagination of like, what the goal being, everybody should feel like they're in a space together. And what are those psychological elements? Eye contact. How do I simulate eye contact through just audio? And, just trying to like decipher that. So it's a really interesting kind of learning process. And I'm proud of the work. And,
it's so good.
It is a joyful, like you mentioned earlier, it is a joyful, it was a joyful experience to make it and hear what everybody would bring to it. Yeah. So that's that's a plus thing. And I like that we've had some time to talk about it a little bit.
Oh, it's been so great. Where do people find it? How do people listen to it?
So like right now, I'll need to set this up, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the link that I gave you, that's the streaming version of it.
Yep.
You could utilize that, and
like I can share that, or I can.
You can share that. It's basically it's just it's not a downloadable version of it, but it's a streamed version of the album. And then I'm going to add a link to the GoFundMe site. So if somebody wants to get a copy, we're in pre-release mode right now as I'm trying to figure out, like I've got to coordinate things like getting record reviews and promoting to radio, whatever, or Spotify or whatever, so I got to get that, and it'll be a digital release to begin with. So so use that link, and then you can check it out, and then there'll be a link to the GoFundMe site if you want to buy it, and and it's just good to feel some sense of completion, even though I have like a big list of things like this promoting the album thing. A lot of people have been requesting, hey, when you get a vinyl version together.
That'd be awesome.
Which would be cool. So so it's like, and then I was like, I didn't do any artwork for vinyl. I did artwork for CD booklet kind of a thing. And I was so I spent like last week, just making sure that was looking good. And so like I've got that stuff kind of ready for manufacturing, and it's just more about, I'll do the digital release first, and then I'll like figure out when I'm going to drop vinyl. The vinyl thing was like, here's the thing. I've been so used to what a CD length would be. And
like 72 minutes or whatever, 70.
Yes. And this is 8. I thought 8 pieces was a good balance of about an hour's worth of music. Yeah. But on a vinyl record, you can only get about 22 minutes a side.
Oh, right. That's right.
So in theory, I have 3 sides and a blank if I try and cram it onto 2 records.
No.
So it sounds like it's a nightmare. It's not. It's just going to be a double album.
It's a logistical issue. Yeah.
It's just two songs per side on 2 LPs.
2 records.
And that, because some of the songs like Manic and the Mardini Effect are both 9 minutes long.
Yep.
So the radio station producer that was not liking drum solos would not like those lengths.
They don't want a 9-minute song. Yeah, especially like where I used to work at, in the mornings and the afternoons, they do traffic every 10 minutes. So the most I could get away with if I pushed it and I did it right, I could do an 8.5-minute track. That was about max. But a 9-minute, unless I told traffic specifically, we're going late to, which people don't like.
Yeah,
it's all about the people in there.
Yeah, and if you were doing John Coltrane's "A Love Supreme," it's just not going to happen.
No, it's not. There were other shifts that definitely we could play much longer tracks, but not drive time, and that's when you have most of your listeners. So it's like,
that's the logistics or the practical logistics of like, like I think a lot of people, it's fun to see under the hood sometimes. Because. Most people, they're just listening to a radio station. It doesn't occur to them, oh my God, these the traffic announcements are helpful because I'm going to work or whatever. But like just the idea of like, there's limitations on what you play and how you have to time things in between those things.
Time is king. It's all about the clock. It's all about the clock. Every second counts.
That no dead air.
Or the public radio pregnant pause is okay, but that's,
with the whispery voice. Yes. Yeah. You're listening to NPR.
NPR. This is NPR. Yeah. Amazing. Well, what else do you got going on these days, Lennie? I mean, you do work with San Francisco Conservatory.
Yes.
What else is on your plate?
Well, I'm an adjunct professor at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and I teach like a couple of days a week there, and then I'm doing my professional composing work all the rest of the time. And the adjunct thing is just, it's a contribution back, it's kind of helping the next generation figure out that they're not alone, that some of us have been through this path before. Yeah. And hopefully we can, this mentorship once again, it's just kind of sharing that. I've been working on Outcast 2 for a couple of years now.
Awesome.
And that's still in development, but they're getting close. They haven't announced when they're going to release the game yet. We will have another conversation about that at some point.
Good.
Which is cool. But that was 2.25 hours of music and orchestra, choir, soloists.
Wow.
I have soloists from all over the world,
Cool.
So that's
now, was that as a result of COVID too? Do you think that you had soloists all over the world? Okay.
I had to remote record an orchestra. So
okay, yeah.
But not like a violin at a time, but we we had to do smaller sections. Everyone was masked. There's certain countries that had it way more together than we had here in the United States.
Yeah.
Our response was pathetic compared to like a country like New Zealand, where there was we got it handled. And then, quite a few of the European countries, they had their cases and stuff like that, but they were able to kind of pretty much, everybody was like, I think it was an example. Germany was just like, we'll pay you to stay home.
Yeah.
Because, we need this to happen. And then the Germans were just like, okay, like everyone stayed home and stayed healthy. So, so for that project, there was definitely, like COVID issues of, just managing everybody's health and being able to get stuff done. So some of that is just trying to figure out scheduling. And when is it doable? And then, it was worrisome because you're juggling a lot of balls, and fairly large budget, trying to like go, okay, can I get everything recorded with the orchestra? Because the remote people, they can record in their home studios. So that's one thing. But, when you're trying to get, an entire string section, like 50 strings together or something like that, you got to make sure you can get them before it gets to the winter and the case count goes up. So it's like crazy stuff like that. But it was, there was some of that. And then, and that makes the editing, it all affects what you do and the time you have to schedule for other things. So like you have to edit a little more. Right. When you're not recording everybody at the same time.
It's a tremendous amount of extra work, right? Yeah.
So, and then on top of that, it even changed how I orchestrated some things.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because it's just because everyone was, like the woodwinds were recorded separately from the brass, and then I had like high strings, low strings, and choir and stuff like that. So it was like, so it was just like, by the time I got to the woodwinds, it was just like, oh man, I didn't really fill in some of those holes there,
Yeah.
So
is there a release date for Outcast 2 yet?
Has not been announced yet. And so therefore, that's all I can say.
Okay, yeah, sure. That's the one part of the NDA we've just bumped up against.
It's just, but the thing is, it's really interesting on that, it was just sort of a side thing, is that the publisher has been really cool about allowing us to say certain things even with the NDA. So cool. usually in video games with the NDA, you can't say what game you're working on.
Right.
Any of that. Yeah. And they put on the website for the game my name when they first announced the game.
Nice. Well, it's one of the best parts of the first one.
Well, thanks. And but like I reached out to them and said, so when can we talk about when can my people, my crew and all that, when can we say that we worked on it? And they're like, now it's okay.
Awesome.
And then they've allowed us to release through like YouTube and things like that, little snippets of things, and they were really supportive. We did the Game Developer Conference recently, and I was doing a speaking thing with the lead audio programmer for Outcast 2, and we were talking. It's not quite a post-mortem because the game's not even out yet.
Right.
It's pre-mortem or something. I don't know. What do you call it? But we were able to talk about like the music design and the audio design and some of the challenges and things in a few things about remote recording, with something like that. But we could kind of put a little bit of demonstration of under the hood types of things things that we're trying to do. And we're trying to do some fairly innovative things that I haven't seen too many people do in video game audio. So talk about that and share that with the community.
Nice.
Which is really unusual that a publisher was like, and,
right.
I mean, there's this thing with NDAs of a lot of things, it's about control.
Yeah.
But what usually gets lost in the equation is a lot of times they're like, we want marketing to determine how we're going to put the message out and how we want to do things. And I totally understand and respect that.
Yeah.
But I have people that follow me. I have a fan base. And everybody that works on these projects has their own fans and things like that. And we can sell more product. if you let us collaborate and go, just let me know when you're going to say something so I can say something. So in the case of THQ Nordic, which was the publisher on Outcast 2, they've been super kind and
that's awesome,
super supportive of all that, which is really cool. And I think it's been kind of interesting, and we'll see, when they do the final announcement of, hey, it's coming out on this date and all that. But I can say that it's been a joy to revisit, my very first video game score. And play in that little sandbox and try and do even more innovative things, which is
amazing.
It's what I've always operated from this kind of principle of I don't want to be bored.
Yeah.
I want to do projects that are really interesting. I want to work with great people and in the context of the Big Band project, that was something I've always wanted to do. And there'll probably be some more stuff like that, more personal projects as we move forward.
Good.
Because that's also me expressing myself as completely as possible. I do that through the media work, but I also just do it kind of every day. So,
well, Lennie, I just loved the album. I loved getting caught up with you, and I'm excited that we have many more reasons to talk in the future.
Of course.
Yeah,
I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, thanks. I mean, do you have any final thoughts about the album or anything?
The only thing I would add, and this is sort of one of the things about mentorship, is one of the things I'm doing as a supplemental thing on it is I've asked everybody who played on the album, including the people I dedicated songs to supply me with like 1 or 2 paragraphs on who were their mentors.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So that'll be up on a website, where you get to see who were Peter Erskine's mentors, who were Michael Gibbs' mentors. So, and Michael Gibbs was a composer in residence at Berkeley when I was there. And he's worked on a ton of albums with artists like Joni Mitchell and Carla Bley and just, all sorts of stuff. So that's sort of its own little breathing entity, is this idea of mentorship and influences, and going to be like putting that together. But I think as far as something to take from the album for people who check it out is just, it's sort of a representation of how individuals influenced. And it can kind of come from different places. It can come from a human being, or it can come from just the song you heard that was just floored you. Yeah. And so that's part of it. Yeah. And so that's hopefully they enjoy it. It's great playing, just amazing playing by a bunch of people who are really super incredibly talented, and it's just if anything, if it inspires somebody to do something that they just can't help but do because of love for expressing themselves or whatever, go make something.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're makers. That's what we do. We just make things.
Yes, we do.
So that would be probably like a good little parting thought, is to go make things.
Go make things. Yeah. I love it. Thanks so much, Lennie.
All right, thank you. You take care.